The return of inflation is starting to look like a worldwide affair as consumer prices across the globe wake up, dig out of their shallow graves, pull out the stake, and scream, 1970s, here we come. On the heels of last week's inflation jump in the US, now British numbers are telling the same tale, showing the first rise in almost a year to 4%. It's worth noting Reuters' economist survey had expected inflation to go down, not to go up. Throw in rising inflation rates now in Canada and the Eurozone, and inflation is currently rising pretty much across the entire West. Only Australia has fallen. Now, the UK had been a canary in the coal mine since it went up so bad. In fact, even worse than the US, with official British food prices hitting 20% earlier this year. Food is still running hot in Britain at 8%, but the big surprise was everything else. So services, transport, recreation, stuff you drop on your foot and stuff you do not. So airfares were up 60% on the month. Clothes went up when they normally collapse post-Christmas. Live music, holidays, theater, it is all up. In fact, annual services inflation in Britain hit 6.4%, which is a problem since those make up the majority of what British people buy, as they do across the West. Now, this all mirrors what's happening in pretty much every Western economy at this point. Indeed, that same FT article notes what I've been saying in videos for several months, that there's been essentially zero progress on inflation in the West outside of energy. And energy itself is driven by looming recession, which always yanks down energy prices, along with the winding down of Mr. Putin's war. Now, underlying inflation, meanwhile, hasn't gone anywhere for the simple reason that obscene government spending has continued, also across the West, essentially taking all the money they grabbed for COVID lockdowns and repurposing it for everything from diversity to global warming to millions of random migrants. General rule of thumb is once government gets a hold of budget, it will not let it go. It will find new excuses to waste it. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Interestingly enough, surging inflation hasn't really changed market expectations of rate cuts by central banks. That's weird since normally you'd expect central banks to not cut rates if inflation is rampant, because they know that cutting rates makes inflation worse. There are a number of hypotheses why. So one that I've argued is that the Fed is so afraid of recession that it's going to let inflation rip to knock down those coming unemployment headlines. Another much darker possibility is that perhaps the Fed doesn't care about inflation or the economy, because what it's really afraid of is the stability of the entire financial system. If that is the case, then they will cut rates no matter what happens to the economy, because the alternative is a financial collapse that is too big even for them to bail out. After all, high rates were what crashed all those banks back in March, and they never really fixed it, they just papered it over. So central banks across the West at this point have painted themselves into the mother of corners, potentially facing durable global stagflation for the first time in 50 years, this time paired with a financial crisis that would make it a combination not seen since the 1930s. Read the rest of the article with charts and all at profsananj.com. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.